any further ado, I'd quickly like to welcome and introduce our speaker today, Richard Harris. Richard Harris founded and is now Special Counsel to the Government Relations Business Unit of Cannings Purple, WA's largest public relations firm. I first met Richard over 40 years ago at the University of Western Australia, where he studied political science, and he was also editor of the student magazine Pelican. So we go back a long way, but since then he's gone on to have an extensive and very professional career in government, energy, resources and government relations. He started his career as an advisor in the Hawke government. He then switched to the WA government, where as a senior public servant, he oversaw iron ore and LNG projects, managed a regional planning study and was involved in opening up the electricity and gas markets. When he left government, he became a lobbyist with Hawke Britain before moving to the energy sector to develop new power stations, then on to Cannings Purple. But in addition to that, he's co-founded and he currently chairs the WA Independent Power Association, representing private sector generators and retailers operating in the WA electricity market. He also chairs the Dom Gas Alliance, representing large gas users in the state, and he's director of WestGen, a local renewable energy company. So he's very much a busy man. Today he's going to be talking about the dark art of lobbying, as you can see from the first slide. We've already had a couple of lobbyists do curtain corners in the past. Daniel Smith, many of you may remember, a few years ago, now at Regen Strategic, spoke about politics. Earlier this year, we had Eric Ripper, former Deputy Premier, and Jason Marocchi from GRA Partners also speaking. And we also had Saffron Zoma and Scott Ludlam talking about the other side of lobbying from the outside, from the Australian Democracy Network. But this is the first time we've actually had a lobbyist talking about the actual lobbying activities, as opposed to just talking about politics or reflecting on public affairs more generally. So we're getting the insider's view today. It's really good. So Richard, thank you so much for agreeing to do the talk. Lovely to see you there, and I'll talk to you later on in the Q&A. Over to you.
So thanks, John. And as John said, I left government, state government, early 2000s, about end of 2003, after about 17 years as a senior bureaucrat working in resources and energy. I left to join a company called Hawke Britain, which at the time was probably the largest government relations firm in Australia. And joining them, I didn't really have a good idea of what lobbyists do. I understand vaguely that they met with government officials from time to time, but I thought I had some ideas of what they might do, but I was lucky I had a couple of very senior people in Hawke Britain who introduced me to the practice of government relations. And one in particular, Justin DeLollo, who's gone on to become another a leading exponent of in management consulting. Justin took me aside and taught me what he thought were all the, if you like, secrets of government relations. And he said, Richard, government relations and lobbying is really a dark art. It's a mysterious phenomenon that we like to keep mysterious. And the reason is, if everybody knew how easy it was, how government relations in practice is actually quite simple, then we'd be out of business. So he said, let's keep it that way. We don't tell our clients that it's easy, and we don't tell our clients how we do it. So after having that introduction by Justin, I went on and became a lobbyist. And to some extent, Justin was right. It is a little bit of a dark art, but as I'll talk to you in a little bit, it's become more transparent from what was certainly in the mid-2000s a very opaque profession with some problems, certainly in WA here. It's now become, from those who have been involved in the profession, it's become a lot more a respectable profession, and it's now becoming more an accepted part of public affairs and public relations generally. And at the time when I took the job with Hawke Britain, I was working, my minister was Eric Ripper. And I remember, just as a farewell thing, Eric said to me, so Richard, it's not that hard to come and meet with a minister. If you want to meet with a minister, will accept that if you're in the industry or business. Why do you need it? You don't need a lobbyist to do that. And I said, yeah, that's right. But do people in business know how to talk to ministers and how to deal with ministers? And I think that's what I've learned over the period since I left government is industry generally, commerce, but not just that, a lot of not-for-profit organisations who deal with government have no real understanding of how government actually works. But more than that, they really don't know how to talk to government. And when I was in government, I went out of my way to communicate with industry and with those that I dealt with the stakeholders in the community. There are those in government who don't do that, by the way, and they live in their own little bubbles. And I think that's not good for anybody from on the government side, not to understand what the needs of industry and other community stakeholders are, and from stakeholder side and community and industry side, not to know how government works. And as I'll explain in my presentation, I think the lobbyists, the good ones, provide that link between the two and bring those two parties together so that you can get better solutions. New slide, please. Just a little bit about the company I work for. John said I joined Cannings Purple. It was Purple Communications then in 2010. So I've been with them 12 years. Cannings Purple is, as John said, the leading public relations firm in WA. And we're a strategic communications company in that we don't deal in what we call retail PR or marketing. We sit down with our clients and we work out what are their real needs, and how we can help them, particularly around their communications. So very important for us, not just to tell companies and clients how they should speak and communicate. We do listen to them. Together, I think we manage to work out solutions for them. New slide, please. Cannings Purple acknowledges traditional owners of the land, the Noongar Whadjuk people, their ancestors, elders, past, present and future, as the original custodians of this land. So, thank you. New slide. Just a little bit of publicity for us. Cannings Purple originally founded in 2004 by Warwick Hazeldine. At the same time, I joined Hawker Britton, and Warwick and I got to know each other, and we worked together on a number of clients when he was the managing director of what was Purple Communications before it became Cannings Purple, and I was working with Hawker Britton as a government relations professional. So we got to know each other over that time. I left Hawker Britton after a few years, went into the energy sector. And after that, I came back in to talk to Warwick about joining Purple Communications and setting up a government relations business in what was essentially just a corporate affairs public relations firm at the time. So to broaden the offering that Purple Communications has to its clients, having government relations as well as corporate affairs. It's grown enormously since that time. It's now Cannings Purple, part of a worldwide network of public relations firms, the WPP organisation, with offices right around the world. We do government relations, corporate affairs, investor relations, community relations, graphic design, digital marketing, and media relations. So it's what's called a full suite service offering to clients, not just any one of those. And we often find our clients don't need just one or two of those expertise or offerings. They usually work better when we do a number of those together. We'll bring expertise in even for government relations, we do need to learn how to present the information that we deliver to government. So all of those different parts of the business do work very well together. I'll talk a little bit more about that, about the different types of firms that do government relations shortly. Yeah, new slide, please. So the dark art that Justin DeLollo taught me in 2004. And in 2004, yes, it was a little bit of a dark art. And if you can remember, go back to that time, it was the Gallop Labor government, and there were other lobbyists around at that time. And there were, fair to say, there were some issues around how some of the lobbyists behaved in that period. To the extent that the government of the time banned contact with their ministers dealing with a number of those lobbyists that were in play at the time. Within Hawker Britain at the time, we had our own code of conduct, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for just one firm to have a code of conduct or code of ethics. You really need to have that apply right across the board to all participants in the government relations space. And at the time, there was no control or no means of regulating how lobbyists behaved, except that the government of the day could just say, no, we're not talking to you and we're not dealing with you, which is what happened. Change of government with Colin Barnett becoming Premier, and that had been a political issue at the time. And Colin Barnett introduced firstly a code of practice for lobbyists. So the code of practice was set up, which effectively said this is how you must behave. And it was administered by the Public Sector Commission at the time. In 2016, that code of practice was turned into an act, and the act effectively gave that code some teeth, and it stipulated these are the rules that for behaviour of lobbyists in WA, and put in place a number of penalties if the code is breached or some of the regulations within the Act are breached. So there's quite severe penalties for going outside of the Act. And what it does, the Lobbyist Act, the WA Integrity Lobbyist Act 2016, effectively does what I said at the beginning, turns something which was an opaque industry or profession into something which is more transparent and very, very open. So the way it works is all lobbyists who represent clients, what are known as third-party clients, and have activity with government in representing the interests of their clients must be registered on the Register of Lobbyists. And the register is kept by the Public Sector Commission. You must also register your clients. So any client that you represent in your dealings with the government must be registered on that register. There must be record keeping of any meetings between the lobbyist and with the client and government, or just with the lobbyist and government, whether that's a telephone conversation or a meeting. But the obligation is actually on the government official to make that record, not the lobbyist. The obligation on the lobbyist is firstly to be on the register, to behave in an ethical way under the code of practice, to behave, not to say anything that's untruthful, and to not misrepresent the interests, not misrepresent any of their clients or misrepresent the government in terms of any outcomes of meetings with government. The So the government, so the onus there then becomes on the government official to keep a record of any meeting, and not only that, but whatever topics are brought up in any meeting. A very big point of the Act in WA is that there should be no success fees. So no interaction with government should hinge on any particular outcome being achieved for a client. This had been a practice certainly in the 2000s, not just in WA, but around Australia, that lobbyists would act for a client, and if they were successful in achieving a particular outcome, then they would be paid, could be paid a success fee. That is prohibited under the Act in WA. One of the other things that is probably worth mentioning is that the other restriction is that any senior official coming out of government cannot become a lobbyist within 12 months. That applies to any member of parliament and any former minister and any ministerial or ministerial advisor above a certain level. And that I've seen that happen in practice, that some people who come out of government happened to us that we wanted to employ a former government official, and we had to wait 12 months before he could become a lobbyist. In my mind, I think the WA Act is working pretty well. I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. Other jurisdictions have similar codes of practice. I think the WA one is, from my understanding of what happens in other states, is probably one of the better ones. And it does work well because I think of the penalties involved and the rigor in which it's overseen by the Public Sector Commission. New slide, please. So who are lobbyists? Well, they're a variety of, comes from a variety of professions and backgrounds, not all from government. Obviously, some knowledge of government is a good thing, and or politics. So not necessarily that you've been in government to be able to become a lobbyist or a government relations expert, but certainly understand how government works and understand how the political system works. I think it's better that you do have some experience in government myself, because it's only when you've actually had that experience of being in government, you know how it really works. And I've been fortunate to be both in the bureaucracy and work in the ministerial office, and know that there are those two parts of the government do need to work together, but you get different views within the minister's office compared to the bureaucracy, and just understanding how one works doesn't necessarily give you a full picture of how government works as a whole. Yeah, you get ex-government officials like myself, some ex-government policy or media advisors who worked in minister's office, and probably fair to say they're more political, on the political side. Ex-MPs and ministers obviously are very much on the political side. But you also are tending to get, particularly in the last few years, more people are coming into this area who have got a background in communications, because communications, strategic communications, is becoming more important than the, if you like, the old-fashioned view of what a lobbyist actually does, which is probably in the old days was more about opening doors and getting meetings with ministers. That's very much a small part of what goes on in government relations these days. And what are the sorts of lobbyist firms that are out there? Well, when I was at Hawker Britton was very much just a government relations firm. It didn't do anything else other than government relations, didn't do any public relations, investor relations, media, anything like that. We're very much focused on government relations. Hawker Britton still exists, and there are a couple of other organisations similar to that who just do lobbying. But more and more, the government relations firms are integrated within public relations companies, which is like Cannings Purple. And when I came to join Cannings Purple, or Purple at Communications, it was then 2010, I thought that was a better fit of how government relations should work, in that it's part of a strategic communications offering rather than just as a government relations offering. The other thing I wanted to make sure when I set up the business at Cannings Purple, the government relations business, was that it was bipartisan. Now, Hawker Britton was certainly just a Labor lobbyist firm. It was staffed by ex-Labor people. Interestingly, I was the first bureaucrat that they'd employed at the time. Previously, or before that, it was all Bruce Hawker and others had worked in the New South Wales Labor government previously, and others had worked around Australia with federal Labor politicians or with state Labor politicians. But since that time, and certainly in the last 5 or 6 years or 5 to 10 years, I should say, more and more public relations firms are getting involved in government relations. So the specialist lobbyist firms who just, A, were just lobbyists, and B, were just one side or another. And on the obvious side of, or the other side of politics to Hawker Britton is Barton Deakin. And interestingly, that was set up from the same organisation that Hawker Britton was. So STW was the major shareholder of Hawker Britton at the time, and it bought, effectively were buying out Hawker Britton, and they wanted to set up a Liberal firm. So they talked with Bruce Hawker and Justin DeLollo at the time, and they came up with the concept of Barton Deakin. So it was born out of a Labor firm. But it's now very much staffed by Liberal former staffers and Liberal former officials. So yeah, my view is the better fit, and that seems most of the firms in WA are like Cannings Purple in that A, they are broader public relations firms, communications firms, and B, they're bipartisan. It doesn't mean that people who work for them don't have political views, they do. But it means that they have both sides of politics within the organisation, and they can deal with both sides of politics as well as the bureaucracy. Interestingly, at the bottom dot point, there are quite a number of other bodies, obviously, who do lobby. Industry associations, special interest groups, environmental groups, and not-for-profits, and so on. None of those have to be on the lobbyist register. The only ones on the lobbyist register are those lobbyists who act for third parties. And it doesn't have to be for money. It can be for pro bono, but it's a third party acting for a client as a definition of a lobbyist that needs to be on the register. In-house lobbyists, and they're all the big organisations, big companies, the BHPs, Rios, Woodsides, FMG, all of them have their own government relations experts who do essentially what we do, except they work in-house and they're not third party. They are not regulated either. They don't come under the Act, but they effectively do the same work that we do. A new slide, please. So who are our clients? So people who come to look for the assistance of a lobbyist could be effectively anybody, but essentially those organisations and businesses who deal with government. And if you think about that, that's a wide range of organisations, because government, certainly these days, touches almost all walks of life, whether it be at the commercial level, the regulatory level, the infrastructure, energy, any sector you think of has interactions with government, or is controlled by government, or is subject to government policy. Our clients cover the full range, so we tend to probably in Canning's Purple have more mining clients and energy, given my energy background. But you look at it's an interesting, if you want to have a look at who the clients of lobbyists are, the lobbyist register is there for anyone to see. And it's very, very transparent that who are the clients, who are the organisations that have employed a lobbyist. And you can look through that and you get a good idea. It really is a good cross-section right across the board of organisations within WA. And that, as I said, not just the big ones, but a lot of smaller ones, and a lot of those not-for-profit as well. We do our own pro bono work. Royal Flying Doctor Service, obviously, big client of ours that we do pro bono for. We've done, and not so much government relations for them, but more PR. Surfing WA, other organisations we've done pro bono for. Pretty much all the big lobbying firms do have that capacity, like legal firms, to do pro bono work. And a lot of the way lobbying firms or government relations / public affairs or public relations firms operate is very much like the legal profession, in that, you know, the way we interact with clients and the way we manage clients and the way we charge clients as well is very similar to the legal profession. We do have on our client list universities, schools and educational associations that we provide government relations advice for. As I say, as well as others not-for-profit organisations, and we do have on our list Indigenous businesses and organisations as well. Excuse me. What are the things why would you go to a lobbying firm? Firstly, in WA, I think a lot of the business that we get is effectively projects, mining projects and resource projects, who are dealing with government on approvals. And not that we do anything in terms of trying to get special deals for them. As an ex-bureaucrat in that sphere, I know that that's just not possible. It really is just today about understanding who are the ones you need to deal with. To get any project off the ground is a multitude of acts, regulations, and agencies that you have to deal with. And unless you're a company the size of an FMG or a BHP and you have your own in-house government affairs, government relations person, then it's very hard for some of the small mid-cap miners to know just what they need to do to get their projects off the ground. So that's a lot of the work we do, is providing that sort of advice. Is, you know, you really do need to put your submission into EPA. You have to deal with Department of Mines and Resources, Mines Industry Regulation. Sometimes it may be Department of Jobs, Tourism, Innovation and Science. It may be Treasury. It could be any number of different departments or ministers that you have to deal with. But to somebody who's not experiencing that, it is like starting in the end of a maze and trying to work your way through it. Sometimes you just need a guiding hand to take you through that path, and that's a lot of what we do. Other companies come to us and they don't actually necessarily want anything from government, but they do effectively just want to maintain their good relationships with government and or raise their profile. For example, companies coming to locate in WA from either interstate or overseas. And they're used to doing this right around the world, is they want to just get to know who's in government and how government works in WA. So they come and we make the introductions, and we give them a briefing on how the government works, who's who in the government, and then we can facilitate them coming to talk to government about what they intend to do in WA. And that, again, is nothing more than just information sharing between people coming in to WA and government WA. So it's a facilitation type of offering. Meetings with ministers, as Eric Ripper said, it's actually most companies on their own can get a meeting with a minister, and that's not the important thing. The important thing is what you do when you actually meet with a minister. So, but yeah, we do facilitate meetings with ministers if that's needed, and or with government departments. As I said, who are the lobbyists? Effectively, we are the ones who actually, our expertise is government. So people coming to us who really want to deal with government, want to get to know government, or going through some approvals process or regulatory process and they don't understand who to talk to or what they need to do, first port of call is come to us. We don't pretend to be experts in any particular field. We just are experts generally in how government works, and we do know who are the responsible departments, agencies, regulators, and ministers, and that's how we help our clients. New slide, please. So just drilling down a little bit in what we actually do, and effectively what we do is solve problems. So as I say, clients come to us and sometimes they do have really what seems to be big problems to them, at least anyway. So the first thing we do is sit down with them and work through what their problems are. And we sit down and we work out what needs to be done and how we can help solve their problems if that's what they are. And sometimes they're not problems, but a lot of the times they are. Sometimes we'll sit down with them and we say, well, you really don't need to meet with government. We don't think that's necessary, or you certainly don't need to meet with a minister. That's not necessary, but you probably do need to meet with one of the senior bureaucrats, or this department or that department. So it's not a question of just saying, as is, I think a lot of the view of what a lobbyist does is just organise a meeting with a minister. That's very much the last bit of the thing we do, if at all. It's very much looking at what is the context of the client, and what are their issues, and what are the policy settings around that, and how can we try and solve their problems. New slide, please. So just drilling down a little bit more, Government Relations 101. So we, as I said, we get to understand the client. What is the business? What are they dealing with? What is the environment they're in? Who are they? Get their background, meet with them, talk with them, understand their business. What is their expertise? Who are the key people in the organisation? What field are they in? and then look at more deeply about what is the issue. Is the problem regulatory? Is it a funding issue? Is it on maybe they want to provide services to government? Is it a policy issue, or is it legislative? Do they want to consult with government on legislation that's being drafted, or have some ideas for new legislation that they think may be required? And I've dealt with all of those, whether it be legislation that's currently being drafted or proposed, that does, I think, help government. As I said at the beginning, there's often a lack of clear understanding within government about what industry does, what the community, the specific parts of the community do, because government can tend to operate in a bubble, and industry doesn't quite understand what government's doing. So particularly in the drafting of policy and legislation, unless there's that interaction, you will not get, in my view, the better outcomes. And my experience when I was in government is I learnt a lot from industry by being open and communicative with industry. And legislation, I was involved in drafting quite a bit of legislation, was improved by actually being very consultative and getting to understand what industry wanted, but also what does government want, what does the community want. But that communication is just essential, and I think that's what we do. We help facilitate that. We usually do that in the form of a structured workshop, so we try to manage from a time point of view, but also to get an outcome of or strategy in place of what we're going to do. We set up that workshop in a structured way to drill deeper down into what are the issues and focus on what is achievable. If there's a particular ask, for example, with government, is that achievable? Is that within current policy? Is that something that government would be okay with? Or is that something that actually government would be really happy with because it's bringing some value add to government? And that it could be any of those things, but we do we bring our expertise to that at that point and saying, well, this is how I think you should approach government. And that's happened to me quite a number of times. I've had clients saying they want to do X with government, and I've said, no, that's not going to work. You need to modify that because government, that's not going to be acceptable to government. You need to go back and we can help with you modify that or come back with a better offering or ask of government. So that's, I think, that one of the value adds that we do is do a lot of massaging prior to any interaction with government to make sure that what the ask is going to be or what the messaging is going to be is actually something that's going to resonate with government or at least can be discussed with them. And my advice then, and we will then obviously develop a strategy, but my advice is generally to get to know, for the client to get to know the government. It's all very well coming to me as an expert in government, as a lobbyist and government relations expert. But essentially, it's really about the government, the client themselves getting to know government and doing a lot of that work in the future on their own. Not, maybe coming to us when they need some sort of bouncing ideas off, but it's very much about them developing their own relationships with government. Often I get, or I have it not often, but sometimes I get companies come to me with really bad, particularly in the mining area, who've come up against roadblocks in the approval space. And it's really 9 times out of 10 is because they've done the wrong thing or they've done it badly. And I wish I had the opportunity to say to them, you should have come to me right at the beginning, and I would have told you that this is what you need to do in terms of your approvals, and this is how you should do it. And very much government takes the view that for those sorts of companies, they really do need to do the right thing by the community. They do need to do the right thing by traditional owners. And if they don't do that, it really does weigh heavily against them in terms of getting approval from government, but also in their long-term relationships, their social license in operating within the community. New slide, thanks. So out of that initial meeting and workshopping and sitting down with the client, working out what they want, or what, as I said, sometimes we massage what that is and say, no, this is really what you need to be, you need to ask for, not what you thought you needed to ask for. We then have generally, and this is largely how any lobbyist works in the modern setup. You identify who are the key people and departments that are involved, and generally it's not just one, it'll be more than one. There's a lot of crossover, but there's a lot of different policy settings and regulations and various acts and ministers that would be involved in any major business. So there isn't just a minister that's responsible for a business. It cuts across a number of them. So we're very much looking at what does the matrix look like of the key people within government that you need to have interaction with. What are the key policy areas in those different portfolios? What are the regulations, if it comes under any particular regulations or acts that are involved? If the client or the work that we're going to do does then involve us setting up meetings with government, we then work out what exactly are we going to say to government. Essentially, and I remember Norman Moore, ex-minister, became our chairman when he left government, chairman of Canning's Purple, and he said to me, as a minister, and I used to know Norman as a public servant, that he'd have literally meetings from the beginning of the day till the end of the day with different companies coming in to see him. Each one would probably get half an hour at the most. And at the end of the day, it'd be a blur about what was involved in the first meeting of the day. So you really do need to have a message, and a sharp message, when you're going to meet with a minister, for example, that there's no point in telling your life story or telling the detailed story of your project or your company. You really do need to be short, sharp about what is it you're here for, what do you want to talk about, and particularly what the outcomes you would like to see. And then you can get follow-up from that meeting. So first of all is working out how you're going to talk to the key people, and that applies not just to ministers, but to advisors, to bureaucrats, to regulators, and so on. It's making sure that when you have that opportunity for a meeting, you use that time well, and that you deliver your message in a way that they understand and can either act on, or can say, no, that's not going to work, or we're not going to do that. But at least you've had the opportunity to meet and say your message clearly. Sometimes I've been in meetings and have gone on with a minister, and at the end of the meeting, you haven't achieved anything because there hasn't been clear messaging and clear communication of what's required from the client. we put together with those messages, obviously briefing notes, fact sheets and so on. And we have a practice of doing a briefing note as often happens within government. When I was a bureaucrat within government, before a minister met with somebody from industry, he would ask me as a bureaucrat for a briefing note. I've taken that on board, and we do that at Cannings Purple. I think other firms similarly do that, is we provide a briefing note, which may be slightly different to the briefing note that comes up from the bureaucrat, but at least it provides our point of view, and we provide that in advance. So we're very open about, this is what we're going to come to talk to you about. This is who we are, and this is the things we'd like to talk about, and if we can get an outcome, if needed, or just generally, we want to talk to you about generally where we're going as an organisation, and keep you up to date of what we're doing, and that's often what we do as with our meetings. And it can be no more than just saying, "Hey, our project's going well. We're ready to. We're going to begin construction, next 6 months, and we'll keep you up to date of how that's proceeding." Also, a part of the strategy, and I said at the beginning, it works well because government relations is a part of what we deliver to the community or to industry, in that it's not just dealing with government, it can be dealing with other stakeholders, and we provide that service to companies as well, so that we help them with their community engagement and with their communications, for example, with traditional owners or or local government, for example. So that if we get them, we certainly prefer to work early on in new projects under development. We can map out who are those stakeholders and who they need to talk to in a time frame, so that everybody understands what's going on along the way. There are no surprises, and that often you find when, as I said before, when clients get into trouble, it's usually when they haven't done that, when they haven't communicated well with stakeholders, or they haven't even communicated with stakeholders that they should have done. Sometimes we do need to use media. That's not, we don't do that as a matter of course. In fact, it's probably something that we tend to shy away from in government relations. We much prefer dealing direct with government rather than through media. So very much that's not so much something that is a government relations tool. It's more about how this may interact. For example, if the company is a listed company and wants to communicate with its shareholders, so we can coordinate with that. And as part of the strategy, we work out who does what. So while we're in the background providing assistance and communication services, as much as possible, we like the client to take the lead in meetings with government. We'll come along if need be, but very much it's about them and not about us. New slide, please. So I think I've probably covered a lot of what we actually do as lobbyists. Now, there are areas where I could probably talk a little bit more in detail about some of the experiences, but I prefer not to mention any names, and because we do have confidentiality agreements with our clients. But I think what I've tried to show is that from when I started in 2004 to today, the profession has changed dramatically in WA anyway, in that it's now very transparent. It's regulated, it's open, it's an open book there for everybody to see. The record keeping, the register, We need to be open and transparent with our dealings with government. Government needs to be open and transparent in dealings with us as lobbyists. As I say, I think personally, we do provide, or lobbying does provide a useful value add to both government and industry and other not-for-profits, in that we provide that bridge between the two who sometimes don't know how to talk to each other. Interestingly, I found as a former bureaucrat, when I was in bureaucrat, I felt very much bound by obviously working for the government of the day. But there was lots of areas of policy I thought I could work or improve, but given my position as a bureaucrat, that probably wasn't possible. Coming out of government, I got a lot more freedom, and similar ex-bureaucrats say the same thing, is coming out of government and providing this advice to clients gives you the ability to actually say, look, when I was a bureaucrat, this is what we had to do. But really, if I had my time, or if I could do this better, I would have done this. And you can actually do those sorts of things from the outside, having had the experience of working in government, and then having come out and working with industry, know what industry is thinking, and the commercial world is thinking, and the not-for-profit world. And you can then provide some very good advice, as I'm used to doing as a public servant, providing advice to ministers, provide advice to clients, and also go and talk to ministers and ministers' advisors. That's something that I do also, is go and talk to ministerial advisors or bureaucrats, not talking about any particular client, not lobbying, but just talking generally about policy settings and legislation, regulations, about providing my experience and knowledge, and saying, well, I would have thought this, you might want to try this might work better from a policy point of view, because I understand now a little bit better of what industry is thinking and how they work. So I do think good lobbyists, and certainly more in the more modern era, do provide that value add, and do work within the framework of that's been set up under the Lobbyist Act in WA. And I think they are a legitimate part of the political process. They've been around for a long time. Lobbying in one form or another has been around as long as there's been some form of representative government, even prior to that. Going back to the early British monarchs, the term lobbyist came out of, I think, the 18th and 19th century, where they used to meet in the lobbying chamber of the Parliament. But I think having it under the Act as we do in WA, it is now a lot better. I do think it works a lot better now that the lobbying or government relations is part of general strategic communications. And my own view, I think it works much better if it's bipartisan. And I've been very much since I joined Cannings Firthal, and they've taken that on board. And I'll probably be retiring myself next year, and so Cannings Firthal will continue on as a bipartisan government relations firm. So yeah, that's sort of, John, my insights. I'm sure I can think of a lot more, but probably better cut it there. And happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thanks very much, Richard. And I'm just reminding everybody, you've got you go to Slido, there's already 10 questions there, so we'll zip through them pretty fast. But if you want to ask a question or vote for a question, just go to www.slido.com or download the app, and our event code is JCIPP. So let's get straight into it. It was great, Richard. John Girardi, who asked that question about an hour and a half ago, says, do you ever seek feedback from the people you lobby, e.g. ministers or MPs? And if so, how? To reflect on the success or otherwise of your lobbying.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's what I was just alluding to then, is catching up with bureaucrats and ministerial advisors is post meetings is a good opportunity for them to say off the record, without my client sitting next to me, Richard, that went really well, or Richard, that was crap. Richard, you need to do this. So that yeah, we do that as part of the feedback. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Next question. One from me. Others, I think, have also asked about this. What's the relative effectiveness of a business using a lobbyist versus an industry association versus just making direct contact with government themselves, as per Eric Ripper's advice, and maybe providing a donation to the party? So when does a business decide to do it themselves, or use their own industry association, or use you?
Yeah, as I said, John, I think the bigger ones like FMG don't bother coming to us. They've got their own in-house. They do that themselves, but effectively they do the same thing that we do. What value add we have is not, as I said, not just meeting a minister, but what do you say to the minister? What do you really want to say? And we can massage that and tell them, because you can have a meeting with a minister without us, and you go away and you think, I got a no for that from that minister. Well, if you come to see me, I would have told you were going to get a no first up. You should have had a chat with me, and I would say you could have said this, and you could have asked for something halfway, and you might have got it, or done it differently. That's the value add we had. Industry associations do the same sort of thing, but they're very much at the industry level. My experience is they don't like helping individual companies on individual company matters. They just prefer to deal at the industry level rather than the individual company or organisation level.
Okay. Mike asked a question very related, which is, do you think industry internal government affairs people should also be registered?
My own view, yes, because they no doubt that they do exactly what we do. And they behave exactly the same way as we do, but we are bound by an act, and we actually, it's not just the act, it's the code of behaviour that we have to abide by. They don't come under that. We do. So we've got far more not restrictions, but we have to behave in a certain way. But they're not restrained in any way. Yeah.
But should they be? I guess it's the question.
Yes. Yeah. My view is yes, I think they should be. Yeah.
Okay. And Mike's had a second part of his question, which is also the same question I had. Are there certain clients or issues that you would not accept?
Yes. A lot. Well, again, I don't want to mention names.
Not so much on, or there might be because they haven't got enough money or they're crazy people, but also maybe on more moral grounds or ethical grounds.
Both moral and commercial grounds. When I joined Cannings Purple, and I had a conversation with Warwick about what I wanted to do, I said there were certain things I wouldn't do, and I went through a number of those from an ethical point of view, my own personal principle point of view. Certain individuals, I have to say, prominent people in the community, because I didn't think they were ethical. So without naming names, yes, and we also at Cannings Purple do take that view as well. There are certain things we won't touch. For example, we realise that companies that don't behave well in the community, and if it's an honest mistake, that's fine. But if they've generally got a bad reputation of dealing with either traditional owners or the community, we stay away from them. Yeah.
Okay, next question. What's the difference between advocacy and lobbying?
Not a lot. Same thing. No difference at all. Yeah. Lobbying, as I think I've tried to show, lobbying has this connotation of you go in and you argue for a case. Very rarely do we do that. It's really just going about and talking with the government about what your needs are, and seeing if the government is open to having that sort of conversation. That's yeah, I don't know. There was a view. There was certain lobbyists who might have done that in the past, but we don't. And I think it's fair to say, though, the lobbyist firms that you mentioned have been on here, they don't behave like that either. No.
My impression from a academic point of view is that I think advocacy is often done directly by people who will benefit from, or got a cause, if you like environmental groups or whatever, whereas lobbying, as you say, tend to represent third parties. So it's slightly different as opposed to...
Yeah, I get that. And what I was sort of one of the dot points I put in that last some thoughts is, and I should have talked a little bit more about it. I think that some of the ways we go about it in terms of drilling down, unpacking what is the issue, what do you want to talk about with government, that can apply to those advocacy groups as well, in that a lot of them could learn how to deal better with government to get better outcomes from their organisation.
Yeah, I remember that higher education universities used to get criticised a lot for that as being pretty amateurish in the lobbying game, the advocacy game, but I think they may have picked up over the recent years, but certainly they used to be criticised years ago.
I've come across that from industry associations before, and that's why I chair those two industry associations, and I think they benefited from my experience of dealing with government and dealing with it in a sensible, rational way, rather than lobbying hand grenades. It's the last thing you should do as an industry association, or an environmental group, is just keep lobbying hand grenades and expect to get a result. You won't. You'll just put off government. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question from Delia Hendry here at Curtin. Hi, Delia. As lobbyists tend to represent dominant groups, do they tend to also therefore entrench existing disparities and inequalities in society?
Yeah, good question. Look, that's probably a fair question. As I say, you look at our client list, and yes, there are some large ones, but there's a lot of small ones in there too. And you look at the lobbyist register. In fact, there's a huge amount of very small, not just companies but organisations. Worth having a look if you want to have a look at who's on the lobbyist register in terms of the client base. There are a lot of not-for-profits in there, a lot of those who are trying to look after the less fortunate in the community. And we do try, all, I think, government relations, public affairs firms do try, and they are very conscious of that they don't want to be just seen as representing big business. They do want to share their expertise with those less fortunate in the community. As I said, we do that sort of pro bono work, particularly with Indigenous organisations.
Okay, a couple of quick ones now. I asked this one just before you even started, almost just to get the ball rolling, but I think you've already answered, which was, I said you refer to lobbying as a profession, and I asked, in what way is it a profession? Because it doesn't have codes of ethics, and you told us it does have codes of practice. Does it self-regulate, or do these codes of conduct, and does anybody ever get kicked out? And is there some disciplinary actions ever occurred?
Oh, not as we did actually, as I said, in Hawker Britain, we did go down this path because there was nothing at the time. We set up our own code of ethics, but we did start talking with other, what we thought were reasonable lobbyists, about bringing an industry-wide body together. And we did have an informal one just before the Act was introduced, or before the Code of Practice was introduced at the state level. And we set up effectively an informal professional association with a view that we actually went to talk with government about setting up this Code of Practice. So, and then that became legislation. So yeah, no, you can't get kicked out of it, but you can get deregistered as a lobbyist in WA if you breach the code. Yeah.
Right. This next question, I think I can answer. Angus asked, "Is there a similar integrity act at the federal level?" My impression is a code of conduct. Is that right? It's not so much an act, but there is a code.
There's no act, no. And I think, given the federal government is talking about a federal ICAC, I think it's important that they do think about having a federal lobbyist legislation as well. I think the two go hand in hand. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, Tim Diamond from Unions WA. Hi, Tim, a regular at Curtin Corner. When lobbying a particular decision maker, like a minister, what role does knowledge of their biography or background play? And somebody else asked a couple of questions after, how important are the personal relationships that lobbyists have with ministers and their advisors?
Good, that's a very good question, actually, and it is to some extent important. And part of what you do, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I think the most of the lobbyists or government relations experts come out of government, and the relationships that you have within government, it's important that you try to maintain those. As I've said, governments come and go. I worked in government, state government, for both Liberal and Labor ministers. I got on very well with ministers on both sides of politics. And even when I was responsible, I dealt with legislation. So part of that being responsible for legislation, I got to go and brief members of the opposition at that time. So I thought it was very important then that I knew both those who are in government and those who could be in government. I do that as part of what I've been training my successors to do, is they do need to get to know the opposition. Don't assume that the opposition is going to be opposition forever, because they won't be. There will always be a change of government. So get to know them, but also don't just get to know the ministers, get to know the bureaucrats as well, because they're the ones who do most of the work. Yeah.
Okay, next couple of quick ones. Now, Mike Wood, Professor Mike Wood, I assume, from Notre Dame, formerly at Curtin University and also former senior public servant. And he asked a question, but I think you just answered. Does Canning's Purple do any pro bono work for not-for-profits? And you just mentioned that you do some pro bono work. Is that right? And do most?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's good news. Rob asked a very pertinent question. How much does it cost to use a lobbyist?
Oh.
Well, ballpark.
It depends. Look, as I said, we behave very much like legal firms in that you have charge rates, hourly charge rates for your expertise. We have different rates. I'm probably at the top rate, and then there's those with less experience than me, slightly less. So that's on an hourly basis. Comparable to, I'd probably be charged as similar as a partner in a legal firm. I'm not cheap, but
okay.
I can hopefully answer your question or help you in an hour that might take somebody else 10 hours or so, because I've just been around a long time. Sure. We tend to prefer charging on a project basis. So we'll say, this is your issue. We think it's going to be 3 months work. Dealing with government, it's going to cost, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000 or something like that. Yeah. It depends on the issue and how much work's involved. Yeah.
Sure. Rob also asked, and I sort of alluded to this cheekily before, are political donations useful in getting access to political leaders?
No. I've never advocated it. None of my clients I've ever advocated it. I don't think it does. I think, coming back to one of your early questions, it is more about relationships and understanding government and getting to know government. And you don't need to donate to a party to do that.
Sure. Okay, last couple of questions, and we're almost at 5:15, so it's good timing. We've asked that next one about the personal relationships. Someone asked, do you think that Big Pharma used lobbyists to obtain government support for the rollout of the vaccine? Alternatively, Big Pharma's very big enough to do it itself, wouldn't it?
I would have thought so, yeah. I certainly didn't come across it I probably don't deal a lot at the federal level. I do some federal work, but not in WA. But they, like the big mining companies, they have their own. They use their own in-house people. And the shame of it is, as I said earlier, to your early question, John, that nobody gets to know that, because they're not under the same transparency regime that we're under. Yeah. I
know that I've done a bit of work on this in the past with Martin Drum, Associate Professor Martin Drum from Notre Dame, about, some jurisdictions have much stricter disclosure laws, for example, both on donations, but even publishing ministerial diaries, for example. Just now, of course, I'm sure there are loopholes and you can make phone calls and do text messages and all the rest of it, but there are ways to at least try and so toughen up on that. Anyway, we'll move on. Somebody asked, same idea. How about attending fundraising events for political parties? You get access to a social setting.
Yeah, look, I put that in a little bit different category to donations, in that I do that myself, and I do sometimes suggest a client does, only because it's the opportunity when a client can meet with a minister or an opposition a spokesperson without anybody around, without their minders around them, that you get the opportunity just to have a chat. And that's all it is at those sorts of fundraisers. And both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party do it, as you know, and the National Party. And that is I see that slightly different to just making a cash donation, because it comes back to what I said. You really want to try and build a relationship with either a minister or a shadow minister, and if you can do that, look, most of the time, shadow ministers in particular are more than willing to meet with anybody, because they just feel a little bit out of the loop. And if you go and knock on the door and say, "Can I have a meeting with you?" they absolutely love meeting with you. And when I tell clients, look, when they get into government, and they will get in government again sometime, that they'll probably remember you because you've actually taken the time to go and say hello to them.
Okay, good answer. Last question. Do you think your understanding of how government works has evolved or changed much since you became a lobbyist? I mean, you and I have worked in government over the years, but now you've been, if you like, not on the other side of the fence, but you're certainly in a different side of the office. Has your how government works and how it's perceived by industry changed?
I think so, and I think to some extent, I was a little bit guilty of that bubble, the government bubble that you get into. But as I said, I try to make sure that I did talk to industry. But having worked with industry and in the commercial sector, they look at the world differently, and even not-for-profits look at the world differently. And so, yes, I do look back and look into government now and saying, you really shouldn't be doing this or X, Y, and Z. You really need to talk to people, because that's, you get your policies sorted by actually communicating better with people. But I don't like it when governments don't talk to the community and to industry. I think they're much better when they do.
Okay. Well, Richard, look, that takes us right to 5:15, almost on the dot. So fantastic timing. Well done. And most people stayed online, which is great. And those who didn't, if you've got your colleagues, let them know that this will be up on the website in the next, probably in a week or so's time. Thanks very much, Richard. I know you've had to struggle through there a bit, but you've done well and got to the end of it all. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you one day. And everybody who was tuned in, I'm sure really enjoyed what you had to say. So thanks very much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Cheers, mate.
Great. And everybody else who's there, just letting you know, next week's Curtin Corner, we have George Wilkinson. George is from UWA. He's just submitted his PhD on geography and planning. He's published a few articles. So he's not like a newbie. He'll be speaking on his research topic on why Australia has so few large cities outside of the capitals, like in Perth, for example, where about 80% of people live in Perth. So why do we have so few large cities outside the capital cities? So that's next Friday, 4:00 on Curtin Corner. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Good night.